Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking today to attempt to clear up some of the confusion that has arisen due to releases of multiple COVID-19 vaccines, and in fact, if anyone should get the vaccination. First, I'd like to address why the disease should be taken seriously, and why the vaccine should be taken alongside it. Just take a second to think about the year and a half we've had, been primarily affected by COVID-19. During this time, over 169 million cases and 3.51 million deaths have been recorded as directly due to COVID-19. With such a significant morbidity and mortality rate, the question lies, is any vaccine worth taking? Yes. Any vaccine with the activity to reduce the number of cases and mortality rate is worth taking, as long as you're not struggling from any immunodeficiencies. In the case of those with immunodeficiencies, extra care must be taken. This is so we can establish something called herd immunity, but I'll talk more about that soon. First, I'd like to spend some time breaking down vaccine production and various reasons why we can and should trust the vaccines given to us. Firstly, any vaccine making its way onto the market goes through vigorous clinical testing and trials beforehand. The first step in vaccine development requires a target antigen to be identified, and the vaccine safely and effectively tested in both lab and animal tests. This is done with mice, and after a successful set of preclinical trials, the vaccine testing can move on to people. Testing on people usually has 3 stages. In the first stage, roughly 30 to 40 volunteer participants receive varying doses of the vaccine to help establish dose levels and safety for a wider testing among humans. This can often take around a year or two. In the second stage, the volunteer count jumps into the hundreds. Those tests are done to further strengthen the knowledge around the safety to do with the vaccine. This stage is also crucial to test if the body produces an appropriate immune response to the antigen. This phase can take upwards of 2 years, and only a small number of vaccines have the results required to move on to the third stage. The third and final stage of clinical testing, thousands of volunteers can be recruited to assist in the testing. This final stage is particularly focused on the safety and the effect of the drug in the wider population. In the wider group, the virus must also circulate the population to determine the protective effect of the vaccine. This phase can often take a few years to complete, and if the vaccine's performance is deemed a high enough level, the vaccine will soon get licensed and ready for circulation. Usually, it can take up to 10 years for the average vaccine to move from development to the public. And that process is long, and we know that COVID-19 hasn't been around for 10 years. However, due to strong collaborative effort, resourceful global funding, and quicker testing methods, doing a few of them at the same time, Stage 3 trials for COVID-19 vaccines were completed really fast. Now, I've talked about the process behind creating a safe vaccine just then. I'd like to address herd immunity that I was talking about before. Vaccines, depending on effectivity, can also help to create herd immunity. Herd immunity means that if enough of the population is vaccinated, the disease in question can't actually spread. That's because the disease has only a limited amount of time in an individual before your body fights it off. And if it doesn't find another host to, another person to spread to, it'll soon die out in the population. Not only does herd immunity protect the population as a whole, it also helps provide security among us for those among us with immunodeficiency diseases or conditions, whether they're undergoing chemotherapy, fighting graft versus host disease, or immunodeficiency for other reasons, like leukemia and AIDS. They can be safe within the herd because it's not spreading diseases. And because we don't actually know the percentages of herd immunity for COVID yet, the plan is to immunize as many people as possible. Some examples of the numbers behind herd immunity can be found and looked at in measles and polio, requiring 95% and 80% population to achieve herd immunity respectively. But due to the spread rate of COVID-19, we don't really want to take any chances and get that as high as possible. Now, I've talked about herd immunity. I've talked about the things that make our vaccines safe when they're being created. Now, I'd like to talk about the actual vaccines and how they immunize you, because there's lots of different methods, but we're going to talk about 3 specifically. Firstly, attenuated vaccinations. These come in live and inactivated forms. This type of vaccination is categorized by the injecting of a small amount of the virus in question and hopefully allowing the body to recognize the virus or bacteria in small amounts before needing to fight it off in a much bigger amount. So the body will see the smaller virus, it'll fight it off effectively, and learn how to create antibodies for that and how to recognize that. Live attenuated vaccinations are harder to deal with because it's actually alive, but usually do not require follow-up shots because the body learns properly how to fight the virus. Now, if you put in dead or inactivated shots, it can often take a few booster shots to achieve the same effect as the live ones, but it is safer for the person taking the shot. Now, secondly, I'm going to talk about recombinant vector vaccines. That's a big sentence, but recombinant vector vaccines, they use DNA from the virus in question. So say we're talking about COVID-19, they take DNA from COVID-19 and they insert it into a different virus. So a different, often weaker virus, and then inject that into the patient. Now the virus with the COVID-19 DNA will start to develop some of the external proteins as the strong one, as COVID-19, and the body can learn to recognize the stronger external proteins and can learn how to fight that and go, that is a bad thing for me because it's a virus. Because it's the weaker virus, the body knows how to fight it. And then when comes along proper COVID-19 with its real strength, the body's already prepared in that situation. Now, the concept's pretty simple, but the science behind it is a little more difficult. I can't go into it right now. And thirdly, I'm going to be talking about mRNA vaccines. They work actually quite similar to the DNA vaccines, except instead of putting DNA from, say, COVID into a different virus, they just take the mRNA, which is the messenger RNA, so it's similar to the DNA. It actually is what codes for these external proteins, and they just chuck that straight into the body. Now that'll go and find a cell, and it'll go in it, and then it'll make your cell create the external protein. So your body doesn't actually have to fight the virus, but it learns how to recognize the proteins because one of your cells makes it. Then it goes, oh, that's one of my cells, but I recognize those things, those are external. And it'll try and fight them. And it'll learn that those are things that it can fight. And then once, say, for example, the COVID-19 comes along with they're called spike proteins, the ones that COVID-19 has on its sides, it actually knows how to fight them because it spent that time prepping, and that's how vaccines work. mRNA vaccines are a bit more difficult than the other ones, but when the major disease in question, for want of a better word, rocks up, you're definitely prepared. Now, I've talked about how the vaccines are made and how many of them work, but now I'm going to talk about the actual vaccines. There's 25 current vaccines that have made it to third stage trials for COVID-19, and there's 10 frontrunners. The names are Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, Gamaleya, Oxford AstraZeneca, CanSino, Johnson & Johnson, Vector Institute, Novavax, Sinopharm, and Sinovac. Now, that's a bit of a wordy list. I'm not going to explain all of them to you, but they all use different variations of the vaccination styles I mentioned earlier. The mRNA, the DNA, and then the injecting of the live or dead, just the normal simple virus. But in Australia, our Trades and Goods Authority has only approved 2 vaccinations for use in Australia and on Australian citizens. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine works on the mRNA system I mentioned earlier. Chucking in some of the mRNA so your body learns to make its own, one of the cells will make its own spike proteins for it to recognize. And then the body will recognize that and learn and move on. And learn to fight the COVID virus when it comes along with the same spike proteins. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine uses the recombinant vector DNA method, so you do have to fight a slightly smaller flu along the way. The 2 vaccines Australia is making use of have reported efficacy values of 90% and 70% respectively. This number is crucial for predictions regarding the establishing of herd immunity among the people. As I mentioned earlier, the importance of herd immunity, it lays in 2 primary areas: not allowing the disease a foothold in the community, and due to a lack of eligible hosts, and secondarily, herd immunity protects those among us with autoimmune diseases and immune deficiencies. When looking at the numbers of measles and polio, effective herd can often be found as I said, at different levels of 95% and 80%. And looking at those 2 diseases, we want to aim as high as possible in herd immunization due to the lack of data surrounding the appropriate herd immunity levels in relation to COVID-19. And although all this talking about immunization has occurred, you may had a vaccine already, or be getting one soon. And I just wanted to address that it's often hard to tell if you're immunized. Where's the proof? The issue is that without many local cases at the moment, and coming into contact with the disease, it's not actually possible to tell if your vaccinations work properly yet, and is working to protect your body.